The Pontiffs Anonymous podcast network is sponsored by McKelvey Insurance Group. If you've ever felt confused or overwhelmed by insurance, McKelvey Insurance Group keeps it simple. They're an independent agency, which means they compare options from multiple providers to find coverage that actually fits you, not just one provider's policy. There's no pressure and no jargon, just honest guidance and real help. Call Evan McKelvey at 618-623-0080 or reach out to us at Pontiffs Anonymous and we'd be happy to connect the dots. They will save you money and they'll save it for you in less than 24 hours. Call Evan. This episode of Needed to Hear That is brought to you by Light Source. What do we need when we're in the dark? Sometimes it's simply just a light source. We're here.
We made it.
Oh, boy. I do love our time together.
Same.
Always. We picked Monday nights to record, and I think it's your busiest work day of the week.
Turned out to be.
And now it's turning into mine. So it's such a treat, but it's always like, and I feel safe to do this around you, there's an immediate exhale.
I appreciate that.
Because when we sit down to record, it's going to be informative. I love our conversations. I get to breathe a little bit. Let you do the lifting.
I can handle that too.
And then I know I want you to, and I mean this, when we leave here, I always have a good fucking ride home. Like it's, what you said, we just, before this, in full disclosure, I recorded an episode of Pontiffs Anonymous with Julie Wiseman, who's just lost a son to addiction and suicide 5 months ago. So the duo dog vest, it's very heavy.
Yeah.
Scares me to death as a parent. Ashley said in the kitchen, what is today, Monday, 2 days ago, that you can't see everything under that lens.
Oh, sure.
When I'm
sure.
screaming and yelling at Charlie out of fear.
Or when he's screaming and yelling at you.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's a two-way street.
Yeah.
And it's very fair, but I am terrified about addiction and mental health because it just seemingly nothing as a parent you can do about it.
Well, and I, for the sake of disclosure, of course, I am not a parent. And so anything I say about parenting or how parents cope with things is to be taken with a grain of salt. The lived experience isn't there, but sitting with people and kids and parents and families over the years, that fear is very real. Then you hear stories that make it very real. Or I have, worked with people that have been in that real situation or coping with that situation. There's a very fine line when it comes to, even with mental health and addiction, with somebody who's young, with a kid or with an adolescent or a young adult, where how much of it is, when is it a problem, right? As a parent, when are you concerned? You hear that your kid is experimenting with something or has tried something or is even having a hard time, and what is the line between let's make sure we call in the cavalry and get some help about it versus, okay, this is a kid trying to find their way through the world and everybody has a bunch of speed bumps along the way, and adolescence and is a bit of a tough time for everybody. And I mean, of course, like as parents that err on the side of caution, that's probably the direction. If the worst thing that you do is react with too much support and resource, that's
sure
that would be all right. Not everybody has access to those resources, right? Like that's part of the problem. But to Ashley's point, you can't see everything,
right? Yeah.
through the lens of just fear. But I do think that there is somebody that has sat in the therapy space with so many parents and families and kids, even in the the heaviest and darkest of moments of working with like a teenager in therapy, you'd be surprised. I mean, to the parents out there, you'd be surprised how often the kid that has been telling you every which way to go and freaking out, you'd be surprised how often in therapy that kid still says like, well, I know my mom loves me. You know, like, so like even in the uproar of like some dynamic or struggle, I still hear a lot, you know, kids also know.
Yeah.
They also know that when parents don't necessarily know what to do, or they're not handling everything right, or even when a kid is mad at a parent or something and they're coming in for therapy, I still hear it from all of those kids that say like, well, I know my dad loves me. I know my parents love me.
So annoyed by it.
Yeah, you know, and it's like, okay, that's right. And I've had some really great relationships with parents that are quick to tell me, well, listen, I'm mom. She's not going to tell me. So
right.
Glad she's here to talk to you.
Sure.
You know, like, and that kind of like collaborative space of like, you know, call in the cavalry.
Well, listen to me. You said earlier, it's, you know, being an adolescent, it's hard for everybody.
Yeah.
The adolescent is probably like, way to go. Like Charlie's probably saying, way to go, Dad. Make my adolescence about you.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Well, Charlie's also very good. He's a good educator.
Sure, very much.
He'll show you what he's learned about emotional intelligence.
It's a hard lesson when it comes from him too. I will tell you two things. You know, gave the disclaimer that you're not a parent, but you know, there's a lot of great coaches out there that weren't winning Stanley Cups.
Yeah.
You know, Bobby the Brain Heenan wasn't the WWF champion, but he was the best manager of all time.
All time.
You know?
There it is.
So I'll take your coaching on this any day of the week. And it's validated by Charlie, who in January was having a real bad day, real big meltdown. And he finally asked Ashley and I, he's like, can Holly and Chaz come over? And he wanted his people over.
Yeah.
So.
And we came over.
You did. You sure did. And it was in the middle of the week too. It wasn't like just a Saturday night. So,
well, the idea of, you know, we use a vague language like showing up, right? Where it's like, oh, you got to show up. But then we don't necessarily have, there's not a school for showing up. There's not a showing up course.
Right.
There's probably some books that have that in the title, but a lot of it is that kind of availability, right? Like you want to be a presence for a loved one where they just know where you're at. You know, they know how to find you, right? Like you are available. It's the same kind of thing that you talk about with a support group, right? Where like a support group is just same place, same time.
Yeah.
So it's just like, you know, definitely no matter
it's
what,
available.
Wednesday at 6:00, this is here. And that availability, that consistency, Mary Frances O'Connor is a researcher that wrote The Grieving Body and the Grieving Brain, and she talks about these like floor plans. You know, we kind of have these maps where we know where our what we would call attachment figures, which early on in life that would be our parents or our early attachment figures. We know where they are, right? Like, so when you go home, you walk in the front door, you know where Charlie is, you know where Ashley is within reason, right?
Sure.
Like she's upstairs in the bedroom,
she fucking
she's
better
in the
be.
kitchen, she's laying on the couch in the living room, you know, like,
She's not better be out on Fridays or the tavern.
Well, you're out late today. And so that kind of map, it shows how important these safe connections are for people. Is you know that we talk about in grief. Mary Frances O'Connor is writing about this because of the attachment loss, right? How much of a threat it feels like when we walk into a home and maybe the person that we're used to being there isn't there anymore, right? Like, so if you think about, you're talking about the interview before this with, mom who's lost her son 5 months ago, right? Like there's this space where you walk into your house and your attachment figure, your safe person, your loved one is there. Your whole body and your whole mind has an awareness of what it feels like that they're there. And then you open up the room and they're not. and you're going to experience that as you experience that as a threat, right? Your body experiences that as like a threat. It's not just the heaving, weeping sorrow. It's also this idea that we are so wired for safe attachment that whenever we lose an attachment figure, a part of our system registers that as a threat, right? Something threatening is happening, because that's what happens when we don't have that safe attachment is we feel the threat of our isolation as well. And, and it takes a long time. This is part of why when you really get into heavy stuff like the loss that you were talking about before this, this is why bedrooms stay the same after somebody is gone, right?
Water bowls.
Yeah, you keep these kind of totems of what the attachment was, in this kind of tethering, this kind of anchoring that lets, to make it be known there is nothing wrong with that, right? That is not a pathological expression of loss. That is loss.
When are you going to get over it?
Yeah, any minute now.
You love when people say that.
Any minute now. And so,
just to make you feel better.
Yeah,
right?
when you think about, we think about family and kids and stuff, that's what every single time that your kid comes home, they are coming home to the attachment and the safety and the comfort of your presence, as long as it's a safe home.
Sure.
We clearly are not, we're not speaking right now on what happens when it's an unsafe home. That's a different kind of conversation. But if anybody is out there listening, or between you and I talking, right, that is when you have this safety, a lot of that safety is built on consistency, predictability, repetition, right? Consistency, predictability, repetition, right? Like you do what you say you're going to do when you say you're going to do it, and you are where you say you're going to be. And when you do that, that is providing this inner structure, this inner scaffolding for kids to then step out and maybe take some risks, trying to figure out who they are, or like trying to kind of name what they're feeling and how they navigate space in the world. They're doing that based on what would be considered the holding space that a parent provides, right? And D.W. Winnicott, who is an old British therapist, he talked about that even in therapy. It's a
very British last name.
Winnicott? Oh, yeah. I'm sure there's some Dukes in the Winnicott line.
We've been deep into Bridgerton season 4.
Oh, man, that Bridgerton. Sure. Well, Winnicott would have something to say about that, but it would be boring.
Okay.
But I do love him. But that's the spaces that we hold, is that holding space, is that, because essentially what you're looking for is, can somebody, expand and be authentic and be present and say what they're feeling? Can a kid or a loved one do those things based off of the kind of safe structure that you've provided? And a lot of times, like, that includes just you are where you said you were going to be when you said you were going to be there. When we talk about trauma, especially a lot of what would be considered, I mean, this is an obvious term, but what would be considered betrayal trauma, like when you talk about neglect, or you talk about abandonment, those kinds of things, it's essentially, if you have childhood trauma from some kind of abandonment or some kind of neglect, what you have there is, it means that the adults in your life weren't who they said they were. Right? You needed a mom to be a mom. You needed a dad to be a dad. You needed grandpa to be grandpa,
sure,
grandma to be grandma. You need teachers to be teachers, coaches to be coaches, right? You need people to be who they say they are, right? When there's severe trauma or neglect or abandonment, or what we would call developmental trauma, what you end up with is this internal structure of, like, well, people aren't who they say they are.
Mm-hmm.
Like if as a kid you're abused, if you have experienced parental abuse, right? If you have a dad who's abusive, right? So then adults who said that they were going to be parents, who said they were going to be adults, are not doing that for you, right? Like a dad was not a dad. Your dad was aggressive and violent or whatever. Mm-hmm. What's more confusing is, when you're a kid, you also need that parent. So the person that you might be traumatized by is also a person that you have some kind of loving attachment with. right? So it's deeply confusing, right? What does that say for what happens in your future relationships, right? When you had to hold that, and so
that person's going to need ACA.
Yeah, it's a tough one. And so that's when as we are just kind of staying in the deep end of the conversation, right? Like when people go, if people go get help or need help, most times what the primary function of a helping relationship can be, or a support group or something, is maybe introducing people to individuals who simply are who they say they are. Like that
seems like a low bar, but it's wild how important that is. Started this off with fear and paranoia. We hit record, right?
Yeah.
Okay, you're awesome. You're on that button. For some reason, I always freak out about it.
The red light's on.
That's all that matters, baby. We're telling hopefully people what they need to hear. Thank you for that. That's obviously wildly profound and helpful to me, even as a parent going through it right now. You had mentioned this weekend that there's a couple things that are on your mind, wanted to talk about, and kind of a Sadie Hawkins, if you will, and one of them was secrecy. And I was thinking about that actually a little bit when we were interviewing Julie on Pontiffs Anonymous about her son just battled with shame from a very young age, and for reason he suffered from dyslexia and was always shamed until he got into a good school, and then and kind of it turned into an addiction as he grew into his early to late teens. I started thinking about that as that age, from that reference of what secrets and shame can do, because I think they're pretty connected.
Sure.
But yeah, so I was excited to kind of give you the floor and talk about that a little bit tonight.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, this will be kind of like grief, where this is in every episode somehow or another, kind of like, the only character that's in every book is death. I take that from Terry Pratchett. I didn't think of that. But shame as a concept, like this is, as a social worker, I'm obligated to give credit to Brene Brown. Who, her work on
Dare
shame.
to lead.
Her work on shame is the standard in many spaces. I
didn't know that.
Love the work that she did, and that kind of catapulted her initially, as she has an old TED talk on shame.
Okay.
That really kind of skyrocketed. I don't know if I'm quoting the exact story, but essentially, like, in the time that she had this TED Talk on shame was kind of the heyday of TED Talks, when a lot of the really popular TED Talks were, technology, education, and design, right? They
what
were,
that comes from?
there was a lot of, you still had kind of the halcyon era of like, are we going to have an exoskeleton as a TED Talk? Like when's the next big advancement going to be? And then this social worker from Houston is like, what about that voice that says to you, well, who do you think you are? And, and then everybody was like, oh, I'm okay. I like this one. I'm listening to this one. And it really kind of shot her into the stratosphere, even though she already had some great books out, like Gift of Imperfection.
This is Brene Brown.
Yeah.
I love me some Teddy Roosevelt.
Sure.
So then you
Man in the Arena.
Yeah. So then you told me about her and all of that. And I didn't know that she also was the wizard on shame.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean this
Brene Brown's no one trick pony.
No, and also sober.
Really?
Yeah. She's works.
I'm gonna check her out.
Works the program. Yeah. She's one of the absolute best. And but she kind of started that a way more large scale discussion of this idea of shame that. To the credit of, I mean, even her, I don't know if she works a program or anything. I don't know her background in that regard, but I don't want to misquote it. But clearly in the world of addiction, they've known about shame for a long time. in AA and all of that. They've known about shame for a long time. The way that we kind of like frame it out as a definition a lot is that, this kind of idea that guilt is something that you've done and shame is something you are. Right? Like the way that you experience it internally is that internally you might have some guilt. Guilt has a bit of an emotional function, right? If I feel guilty about something that legitimately caused a wedge in a relationship that I care about, that guilt serves a function because I can rectify it, right? I can say like, hey, I know that I just behaved in a way that created distance here and I didn't want to create that distance. And
it's
you can
like
go
an action. It's like almost there's an action. I have guilty for doing X, Y, Z.
And you can repair, hopefully.
Oh,
hopefully
Gottman's like that repair.
Yeah. And that's attachment language too, right? Rupture and repair. You want reparation, the repair of a rupture is what really heals. But so with shame, then you have this idea that you're identifying with something, right? So guilt again is like something I did, right? Like I forgot to text you back and I have some guilt that I did something that caused you to feel unimportant in our friendship. I shouldn't do that, right? Like, and I hope I don't want that to happen again, and I hope that's not how I want to behave, right? That is an example of guilt, right? I would feel that guilt.
That's a good apology.
Yeah,
like, I can hear myself saying, I'm sorry you feel that way.
Yeah. You gotta dodge that one. Dodge that one.
That's my go-to.
Yeah. And so, like that's guilt.
Okay.
Right? Like that's guilt. Like, oh gosh, that's not how I want to represent myself. And so, you can make that repair. Shame, we have a tendency to feel as more of an identifier, as more who we are. Like shame, this idea, this like, oh gosh, here's something that I'm ashamed of. And if you knew it, you wouldn't like me anymore. Right.
Yeah,
so man. Shame has that real, that griminess to it, that we're keeping something from the world because we know if the world saw it, that'd be the end. Right. Like that we would get rejected. We would get dumped. We would get isolated. We would get judged. And so shame has that. Again, it's like we said, it's along there with secrecy, right? If I'm holding on to a secret, when we think of secrets, right, we have a tendency to think specifically of like keeping a secret, right? Like here's something that has happened or something I've done that I don't say. Sure, that is true, and that
something you'd write
shame.
in a journal, perhaps.
Yeah, and which are private, and then the process of shame kind of gets in there and starts going like, if anybody knew that, that would be it. Right. And like Brene Brown says, it also has that tone of like, well, who do you think you are? Right. Like who do you think you are to think that you could leapfrog or be beyond this conceptually? That gets really, really hard. Shame is about as difficult. The other kind of term that I would introduce here, and it's just because I spend a lot of time with this term and I just gave a 2-hour guest lecture to a group of Buddhist chaplains on this term.
Did you tell them about the podcast?
Yes.
Thank you.
Is also like
subs, baby.
what we used to what historically has been referred to as the shadow as well. Like, and the shadow
shame has?
Yeah, because it's the shadow is the idea. It comes from the work of Carl Jung, who we've mentioned before. The shadow is kind of like the dark or the repressed or disowned aspects of ourselves that we try to keep hidden, right? That we have a way that we want to face the world, right? That we have kind of a persona that we want to put out there. And then
look at people's Instagram stories.
Yeah. And then there's stuff that doesn't fit that persona.
Right.
So we stuff it into what Robert Bly calls the long bag we drag behind us, right? Okay. That's our shadow. We put this stuff in there.
And it feels to me as you say it, like some people, that's a really heavy bag.
Yeah, you're dragging it. And so
like Santa Claus, but full of coal, right?
Yeah,
like
and stuff we don't want people to see.
Right.
Like stuff that we don't want people to see.
It's
there's an idea. I will get obnoxiously spiritual for you for a minute.
I love it.
So there's a lot of people probably know what a labyrinth is. right? And so like, and you'll see a labyrinth in
Don't
different
make me
places.
define it, but I think I got it.
So a labyrinth is basically, it looks like a maze, but you're never lost, right? When you walk into a labyrinth, you can follow the entire path of a labyrinth, and it always takes you to the middle. You know, a maze, right?
I would have missed.
And
the
so
boat.
the labyrinth is a very important symbol in a lot of spirituality, mostly because it is reference to something that we want to believe in Buddhism specifically, but also in Christianity and in pretty much all your major religions. We believe that at our core, we are whole. Right. So in Christianity, you have the idea of like Christ consciousness, or the kingdom of heaven is within you. In Buddhism, we have what's called our Buddha nature, which is that our nature is awakened, that at our core, we are enlightened, we are whole, that we layer all this stuff on top of it, like shame, like guilt, like expectations and success, and this is who I have to be. And yeah, we layer all that stuff, but underneath all of that, the way that we would phrase it in Buddhism is everybody is free, right? You're free. And I have to see you as free. I have to see people as free, because that's my call as a Buddhist, is that people are free. Their true nature is awakened and enlightened. Shame and secrets are the things that are piled on top of that Buddha nature, or so that we think, oh, I'm not enlightened. I'm not awake. I'm not free. I'm not whole.
Who am I?
Yeah. Who am I? It's that little bit of shame. And so, the labyrinth has always been a great symbol of that. And if you see a labyrinth somewhere, you'll see them. We used to have one here in Belleville at the King's House, which is just it's not open anymore, so it's not there. But usually they're just like a pathway, maybe just rocks on the ground that just lead you through, and everywhere you're led through, you eventually get to the middle. And just like life, it does these really interesting things, like it gets you really close to the center and then walks you right back out to the outer rim and then brings you back. It's just looping you closer and closer. Then eventually you're at the center and you can walk right back out. And that is what we want to believe from a spiritual sense, is that collectively the world is always moving towards that center, which is very, very hard to believe when we have shame, when we have guilt, when we're overwhelmed, when we think that the world's going to end, when we watch the news, all those different things, right? We lose this faith. Mm-hmm. And we need from one another is we need to be able to sit with one another and feel that somebody wouldn't judge our shame, that somebody still thinks that we're walking towards the center, that somebody doesn't think that we have lost our course. In the world of Carl Jung, in the world of mythology, there's a story of a labyrinth that has what's called a minotaur in it. A minotaur is just like a large half bull, half man creature. The minotaur in that myth, depending on the reading of it, that's an example of like shame and secrecy, that we're walking through the labyrinth and we know that we can walk.
That.
Yeah, we walk through this labyrinth and it's leading us towards the middle. But I hope at no point do I run into that minotaur, right? And that's what shame and secrecy does to us, is we can maybe believe that we're walking in the right direction, but we get consumed by this idea that at every turn, our deformity is going to be waiting for us. And so we stop walking. We don't move through the hedges of our labyrinth anymore, right? Because we rather, what feels better? I stand here where right now in this moment, I know my deformity and this monster is not able to find me, or I keep turning these corners that even though every corner I turn I'm not lost, right? I'm in this space that leads paths towards the middle. I'm not lost. But around every corner might be the thing that destroys the journey to begin with. So why keep walking, right? We get smaller and smaller. And, so these, these are all old myths and old religion. This is thousands and thousands of years old. Those people were ashamed too. Like that, this stuff isn't there on accident. They were holding secrets and worried about these paths too.
When I think of like shame is the ultimate enemy of vulnerability.
Sure.
It's shame that and I think vulnerability really can lead to, just connection, which, I say all the time is insulin to a diabetic, connection and community is to an addict. and to someone that's pursuing a life in recovery. And shame is what, I mean, is the roadblock, is the opposite pole, the enemy to vulnerability.
Yeah. I mean, you so badly we desire vulnerability, but we get hardened against it. There's an author by the name of Norman Fisher, who is an old Zen teacher, and he has a pretty eloquent writing on the kind of beauty of denial, where
it's a warm blanket sometimes.
Yeah, where he says, if we can't have any time in denial, how would we risk anything, right? Like, he kind of says that if you're never able to deny bad things that have happened, all you'll do is weep.
Sure.
Right? He has a line in one of his books where he says that, you can't cook and you can't eat if you're weeping. And so, it's this idea that if you want sustenance, if you want some kind of satisfaction, if you want to be made whole, there has to be kind of mechanisms that at least give you a break.
Give me something
from the weeping, from the sorrow, from the shame, from the secrecy. And so some of those are these beautiful expressions of spiritual growth and faith. And some of them are less sophisticated, like, nah, that ain't happening. That didn't happen.
Oh,
I'm not doing that. And it's like, it's not to glorify the concept of denial. It's just to recognize that there are some things like shame, for instance, can be so relentless
that
man. Just the denial of them might be the only thing we have
to breathe for a second.
Yeah. It's something where go ahead.
Well, sorry. I've seen people that are living with terminal diagnoses and really have to lean into, that denial gives them a day at the fucking zoo, or out on a picnic in a park, or at a concert where they're not, it gets it out of their head for a minute, because I'm weaker than all of the people that I know that are facing tough diagnoses or terminal, that I would need to get out of my head a lot otherwise I'd be weeping the whole time and having
there's a
party.
A story in that same Norman Fisher book where he was at a conference for Buddhist thought, and like Catholic monasticism is kind of an interfaith conference. And it was a long time ago. So it was right after Pope John Paul had kind of he released a statement about meditation where he called it not very good, right? Like, his take on meditation
was he the one that came to St. Louis?
Yeah.
Saul McGuire?
Yeah.
He didn't catch those steroids when he kissed.
No, he was in the back nine.
Yeah, sure.
When he headed to the Midwest. But Pope John Paul had made this statement that kind of likened meditation to drugs, that it was like a numbing out. And that's it. Like, a critique in the West of meditation has been that it's what they refer to as kind of just navel gazing, right? That it's just like sitting there doing nothing, whereas we got to do something. Right,
sure.
We're Westerners. We have to do things, right? Like, marching west isn't going to do itself. So
get on the horse.
And so this generation of people that had moved meditation into the West and were spending a lot of time peacefully sitting there, keeping to themselves, that really bothered him in some way. And so he was kind of old school in that way. So he had talked about this and likened it to a drug, as just kind of this sitting and numbing out and not really engaging. And so at this conference, somebody had kind of posed that question to the Buddhists in attendance, like, what say you, kind of a thing. And Norman Fisher said that he stood up and he started waxing poetic about the wonders of mindfulness, that it's the opposite of a drug. It is presence and grounding and all these things. And he said that after he got done talking, Joseph Goldstein, who is another really well-known Buddhist teacher, said, well, I don't know, don't we just kind of need a drug every now and then? and just kind of went into like, is it really that bad that we do have some mechanisms that allow us to get a break, that allow us to back off, that maybe are a little bit curative, right? Like, it's not in any way a pro-addiction sentiment. It is just kind of like, we don't want to criticize the mechanisms that we access for survival, right? Like we hope that we can help one another feel so safe that we're not just trying to survive all the time. But when we're trying to survive, when you talk to somebody who behaved in the name of their survival, they aren't necessarily going to sound like the Pope. They aren't going to sound like a deep religious figure. They're going to sound like somebody whose every minute felt like life or death. And that is what shame feels like. That is what a secret feels like, right? That is what, you're talking about vulnerability. If you tell me I need to be vulnerable, and in the back of my mind, I know, oh, trust me, if I'm vulnerable, on the other end of that vulnerability is a reveal that ends me, right? Vulnerability doesn't sound like much of an option.
Right.
When we're trying to support one another, right? When you're trying to think, well, how can I be a space for people to be vulnerable, right? How can I be help with what Brene Brown would refer to as shame resilience, right? How can I help somebody feel that they are acceptable and they are whole or they are already free? One of the things you've got to be able to do is you got to learn how to not look away, right? Like what happens a lot of times is people assume that when they reveal even a little bit of themselves, because remember, like shame and even things that you're keeping secret, they might not be things that are going to chase that many people away. You might have spent your whole life thinking that you needed to apologize for existing.
Yeah.
Right? So you might think that the second that you put your toe in the water of needing something from a relationship, that's the beginning of the end, right? So any of us that are wanting to be helpful for people that struggle with vulnerability or who are carrying a lot of shame, we also have to figure out how to make sure we don't look away, right? The second that you look away, it's confirmation, right? Like no pressure, but the second that somebody shares a story with you after you have created the space for them to be safe, and you just kind of like do some version of, or some version of, oh my God, right? Like that's it. And that, we have to figure out, how to not look away. And then we want the person who is sharing, as an individual, you want to figure out how to not look away from yourself.
Yeah.
Like once a community or an individual or somebody is safe and they don't look away, well, now you got to figure out how to not look away from yourself, which usually is a little harder.
Sure. I was thinking that when you said that it's, you can sometimes handle the people looking away, but we've been doing it to ourselves.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Self abandonment, self-neglect, I believe that I've told this story here before, but I'm going to repeat myself. One of the stories of the Buddha's enlightenment is that the final thing that he had to face right before he became enlightened, when the god Mara was trying to knock him off of this pedestal that he was sitting on under the tree here, was just the Mara going, who do you think you are to feel better? That in a now 2,500-year-old story, the core question is, well, sure, you might get enlightened, but what gives you the right? And we all carry that kernel of shame somewhere in us, that there's a point where we might become seen or loved or accepted or just simply sat with. And then some voice in our head is going to be saying, well, why would this person want to sit with you? And you're like, damn it, I knew it. Yeah, nobody wants to sit with me, and
God.
And that's just kind of it's just so human, right?
Yeah.
It's so human, and we're maybe taught at a young age or from some people that don't necessarily have our best interest at heart that there's something unacceptable about us. And you think about how hard it is to like be a kid, right? Like you don't even want to necessarily be a kid that has one nostril bigger than the other. because somebody is gonna bring it up.
Glasses.
Yeah, and that is
Heaven forbid
not
when the pimples start coming.
Oh man, like that is not because children are cruel little nightmares. It is because as you're making sense of the world, right, and you're observing every little thing, you're also starting to get a little bit of that fear that maybe something is wrong with you, maybe something isn't correct about you, and so what happens when most of us are worried about our own rejection? Well, we just start trying to name it in other people, right? Like, you can't fire me, I quit. Like, and so like it's just kind of baked into our experience, and we need a lot of examples of people reminding us some version of no matter what, I'm here for you, and some version of no matter what you're worried about, that's not who you are.
Right.
That you want to. Helen Prejean used to say she's the nun that they based Dead Man Walking on.
Okay.
She works with death row inmates. Susan Sarandon and Sean Penn were in, I think it's Dead Man Walking is what it's called. But she worked with death row inmates and his anti-death penalty and things like that. And when she talks about basically people saying, how can you find compassion for these people?
Those are Christians that say that.
She says,
didn't read the book.
She makes this great comment about, like, just imagine if the worst thing you've ever done was something you had to wear on a t-shirt every day. Like, if just like you're, no matter what, like, just like whatever you think is the worst thing you've ever done, that's just on your shirt, right? Seeing that thing you've done out of context would be condemnable for all of us, right?
I'm starting to really. How many t-shirts do I?
Yeah, you can rotate them.
God.
Yeah. If you have like
only 7 days in the week.
Yeah, if you can think of a top 7, you can do Sunday through Saturday.
Don't make me do that inventory, please.
And you probably already have. A lot of people have to do that, and that's it's not.
That's a long step.
Oh man. And it is for all of us, right? Like, I've said before, again, shout out to Dr. Jill. Dr. Jill says, to somebody you are who you're scared of being. Like somebody out there is probably saying the thing about you that you are spending your entire life trying to make sure it's not being said.
So it's happening. So there's nothing you can do about it.
It's happening, and you're still worthy of having somebody on this life say, like, well, I like you anyways.
Right.
Like it's this idea of a very conditional sense of affection and approval is something that none of us would live up to 100% of the time.
To go back to Julie's son Nick, who we recorded before you got here, who died by suicide, and the shame just ate him alive. And it started by, he was in a school, he was dyslexic, he was getting shamed, and then he went to a school called the Churchill School in South County that is for elementary kids with dyslexia and ADHD. And she said once he got there and was amongst other like-minded kids, he flourished for those couple years he was there, and the shame really dissipated for a little bit. And I started thinking kind of about, and we talked about it extensively there because he ended up at a place like Crossroads, where he also flourished when he was in a room with other addicts. How we see groups, whether it's, your traditional 12-step groups or any type of support groups, around, not just around addiction, but there's healing groups out there, wellness groups. You do Death Cafe stuff, all kinds of group learning. I mean, that's a good way to fight back on shame, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
to circle back to Brene Brown, right, is that she basically says, like, it can't survive the light. And that's the same thing they say with shadow work is shadow work is a good example because it has this, it has like a neat little gravitas to it, right? Like, we're going to do some shadow work, right? We're getting into the depths. But a lot of people have a tendency to think that when they get into the depths of this hidden stuff, that just because it's in the dark, that means it's bad. And it doesn't mean it's bad. It just means it's in the dark. It just means it's been hidden. And all we have to offer to it is we have to figure out how to offer some friendliness to it, how to, pull it into the light in a little bit in a way where it can't help, but be like, okay.
You said that last week about therapy. It's about shining a little bit of light at a time, knowing when to not floodlight, interrogation room.
Yeah. Because it's something where when we reveal any aspect of ourselves, right, there's a great vulnerability. I've said before, like, if you tell somebody that you have a goal, there's a great vulnerability.
Yeah.
Because that's all they're going to do is ask about it, right? If when we talk about any kind of commitment to something, there's a vulnerability, right? Because people are going to be like, well, how's that going? And when we think about shame or we think about secrets that we would keep, we want to find a space to share these experiences that has also shown itself to be worthy of witnessing us, right? It's not a matter of shouting from the hilltops your deepest, darkest secret so that you can get it out there and it can't survive the light. It's also connecting to your own self-worth enough to know, like, I think that this person would respect my sharing. I think that this room would respect my sharing. You don't want to give it away for free. You don't want to just be like, okay, I gotta, everybody tells me that I need to say this, or I keep hearing all this about vulnerability. Well, fine, I'll go tell somebody, or I'll go say this, or, God forbid, one of the things that happens a lot is we keep kind of circling back to what I would say is a bit of a broken container. You might go to a person who historically has not been particularly that safe or supportive of you, but it's kind of who you got. And so
thinking about the fucking bartenders I used to pour my heart out to.
Well, so there's a bit of a broken vessel there, right? Like they can't hold that conversation. So then when we start thinking about, like, well, who could, right? It's really tough to think, well, I'm allowed to be selective about who I share or expose this kind of deep concept to, this kind of difficult conversation to. I'm allowed to be selective with that. I want to find somebody who is worthy of it. When I think about it in therapy, part of why I would never believe in speed or something in therapy is simply because I don't want to presume that I know when somebody would feel comfortable sharing what. I want to create a space where a person has some confidence that if they share something, it is going to be respected and seen and held, and that as I would say somewhat frequently, the room can hold it, right? Like there's plenty of room in here. But I have to show myself consistent and present and attentive enough to be worth someone sharing with or being vulnerable to, right? Like even in the world of therapy, in helping professions, even in the world of spirituality and religion, one of the things that can come apart sometimes, I think, is the room or the provider or the practitioner, they start to assume that this is a space where people share, right? So they take sharing a little bit for granted. Right. This is a place where people come and share. Every time we sit down, 10 more people tell us some harrowing story. So this is where people share. And we kind of lose the respect that we need to have for every one of those moments of sharing. You have to give people an opportunity to view their moment of vulnerability as particularly significant to them, not as the expectation of a room where people share. I can't take for granted that I'm a therapist, so when you're talking to me, you already know that I'm bound by confidentiality. I want to be here. I can handle whatever secret or shame you're going to bring up. Like, I can't take that for granted. That's disrespectful on my part. I have to find out alongside you exactly what would help you feel like this space or this moment is worthy of sharing your experience. And if I take that for granted, if I just assume, well, this is therapy, so people share secrets, it's gonna diminish an experience in a way that a person's probably already diminishing their experience, right? Like, it's the same thing, I think, in support groups, and I think it's the same thing in a lot of like religious and spiritual spaces where
Sure.
it's like people share, people confess, people tell their story. And so when somebody won't do that or they're not ready to do that, it kind of moves things in this direction of, well, what's going on? Why won't you share? Everybody else shares. And we take it for granted, we take it for granted. And I think that to kind of recalibrate, to figure out how to not look away, to figure out how to stay present with somebody in their process is simply to offer that acknowledgement of, hey, I don't necessarily know that today is the day that you're going to feel like you can share, but I hope you continue to see it from me, that I respect this opportunity to potentially be a listener in it, right? That's the not looking away.
Okay.
There's going back to Norman Fisher, because I've been on a Norman Fisher kick lately. He's an old Zen teacher, so of course I like a lot of his stuff. But
these are like books you can get in the library.
Yeah, you can get all of Norman. Norman Fisher's alive too. You go see him.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he might answer an email. It'd be a slow answer probably if I take a minute. But Norman Fisher says that our greatest spiritual skill, he says, is forbearance, meaning that the thing that makes humanity so unique is our just constant changing and adaptability. Right? We're always doing something different. We're always experiencing something different. We're always navigating a different story. We hold stories as central to the human experience. So forbearance is just like this ability to tolerate what comes, right? Like to tolerate change, to tolerate this adaptability. And so when you think about any practice of sharing spirituality, therapy, help, support group, addiction recovery, a lot of what you're asking people to do is you're asking for this forbearance, right? Like, can you continue to tolerate all the things coming at you? Right? So if you think about somebody who is newly sober, right, you're kind of asking them, hey, are you willing to tolerate that every 30 seconds is going to feel like a brand new shitstorm of your existence? Because that tolerance, that forbearance becomes your spirituality, right? Minute to minute, one day at a time, right? Like we start to espouse a lot of this material that is basically telling somebody your greatest skill right now is to adapt, is to know that change is coming and you can bear it, right? Like you can bear that you don't know what tomorrow brings. And all the things that you've done maybe to keep shame and secrecy out have been in the name of, I can't bear it.
Right. Okay.
I'm not going to be able to bear it. And then we start asking people, please bear it just so you'll live, right? Like just so you'll have a life.
Such a funny, because you can, bear as in BEAR, but you need to bear it, BARE, right? Like it's kind of, I think about what you said at Underground one night, and it's my buddy Kevin, last name starts with an S, I don't know if I should say his last name, who's been on pod, he loves what you said, and I still see him, and he still says, I still think about how Chaz said, I'm a different person a minute from now, I'll be a different person than I am right now. And he's really been in the good mind fucked over and so I'm thinking about that as you were talking about forbearance and how, you're going to change. You're constantly changing and can adapt.
And there's, the one of the beautiful things about Kevin saying that, for instance, and being able to internalize that is, I bet credit that he wouldn't give himself is that when you internalize something like that, when you are able to keep cycling back to, I will be reborn as another version of myself in a couple of minutes and tomorrow and after I wake up in the morning. When you internalize that, you kind of forget that you are internalizing an age-old spiritual practice and concept, right? Like you're not just internalizing a good line or a good idea. You're actively practicing this Buddha nature, this freedom that we're talking about, this idea that like, okay, at my core, I'm awakened, I'm whole, right? And that wholeness is the result of manifestation after manifestation after manifestation, right? A different version of you, different version of you, different of you. And your ability to be a being that it can tolerate the changes and shifts and call to adaptation that is just being human.
Well, I hear Ashley, who's, I was going to say openly, but now I think about it, I mean, most of her openness is because I've shared sometimes without asking for permission. But about her,
Yeah, she's never been a guest.
right? Depression. She's battled depression. And I openly share her story. So
Good for her.
Right. But she says a lot of times she has to remind herself when she's really in the pit that it's temporary, that this, and people, you hear the saying, this will pass. But what a practice and hopeful when you're at your low, that it is temporary, that you could be a new person in 5 minutes, and it's a hopeful. So getting in that practice, I think cultivates and hope. That new ink.
Yes,
that looks good, baby.
Sure
I just saw that.
Just make sure it didn't peel off there for a second.
We got to talk about that after the show. It looks great. I'm so ready. I need Amanda to do some work on me.
She's out there. She's the best in the world.
I'm gonna get Bristy right here.
Perfect. She'll love it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we'll get you a painting first. She'll do a painting first for the wall, then the tattoo.
Okay.
To get you a portrait.
Oh.
Yeah. We got both Diego and Wost.
I bet
portraits. Absolutely.
We talked about his water bowl.
We have beautiful portraits. No, the hopefulness is, when we've said before that, right? You don't go to somebody else and say, "This too shall pass." Right? Like you want somebody on their own to be able to internalize that, right? You don't go to Kevin and say, "Well, hopefully you'll be somebody different tomorrow." Right? Like, like that's a cruel thing to do to somebody. But what you want is that when somebody can internalize that message, when somebody has a moment of like, the only constant in my life is change, right? That those moments that you don't realize when in Buddhism, we call that entering the stream. Right? Like the stream of enlightenment is always flowing, right? It never stops, right? Like the true, what we say, the true nature of reality never goes away, right? It's never hidden. But a guy named John W. Price, who's a Jungian analyst that I really like, he talks about how if he was God and he wanted to hide the sacred, he'd put it under disgust. Right? People don't want to look at things that disgust them about themselves. Okay. That's that shame idea that if you wanted to hide sacred knowledge, you'd put it under shame because I'm not looking under there.
All right. Now you unpack that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's when you think about the adaptability, right? Like sometimes with shame or secrecy, what we're doing is we are believing that this kind of unacceptable version of us has been frozen in time, and it's just us now. That's who I am.
This guy I know won the lottery, and a decent amount, and so he ran home with his ticket, and he hit it, and he took his buddies out golfing, and they said, "Jack, where'd you put the ticket?" He goes, "I hid it in the one place that I'm going to make up the wife's name. Lisa will never find it, under the fucking pledge can because she hasn't cleaned in years."
There it is.
Anyway.
Couldn't help ourselves. On the heels of Ashley's, this too shall pass.
It's like, hey, Ashley, get over your depression. It'll pass.
Yeah.
Right.
The adaptability of it, the just being able, and Ashley is somebody that she carries herself with such a warmth and authenticity that when it's probably even hard to picture what a bad day is, right? I would, I have a lot of, people in my life that I know struggle with depression, with OCD, with their recovery, with their grief, personal friends, close friends. And it's a part of being in someone's life to know that there's going to be times where you hear, hey, this has been really bad for me lately, and maybe you just haven't heard from somebody, right? Like maybe you don't hear from a friend for a couple of weeks and then they say, gosh, my OCD stuff's been really, really bad. My depression's been really, really bad. And if you're if you're committed to somebody in somebody's life, right, you don't do anything to fix that experience. You try to remind them that that does not change your view of who they are in that moment.
It goes back to what you said right at the beginning. You're available.
Yeah.
Regardless, availability.
Yeah.
I thought that was real. And I liken that to like you said about the undergrounds every Wednesday night, community, 6:00. There's going to be meetings from 7:15, 8:15. We're going to be, the space is available. The community is available. And you don't have to come every Wednesday night. You can not come for months. And then, and I've heard this about a lot of healthy spaces like that the key is availability. Create a space, create a community that's available for someone on their journey, and the time is right.
Yeah. I would say I've never heard of a bad idea for a group, but groups are hard to get off the ground because you really have to establish yourself first and foremost as a consistent space.
Sure.
So if I'm talking to a therapist who says, well, I've been working with a lot of, I've been working with a lot of people that have chronic illness or chronic pain, and I want to start a group on learning healthy movement with chronic pain, and my friend who's a physical therapist is going to help run it, and we're going to try to and you get this whole big elaborate infrastructure, right? This just like web of beautiful ideas, and it's like, yeah, that sounds great. Like, do you have the time and the consistency to allow that to be like one or two people for a few weeks or for a couple of weeks or a couple of months, right? Like when you're really trying to get it established, because really when we think of a group idea, we're hoping to introduce people into shame resiliency. We're hoping to take take two people who experience the same thing and be like, do you feel a little bit more seen and respected in this space? But it takes a minute. Mostly because you've got to show yourself kind of to the world, to your community, that you're going to be there. That you're going to be there. And if you don't have that kind of flexibility, which sometimes you don't, you might have an idea of you're going to do an anxiety group, and you put together a curriculum and you say it's Wednesdays at 6:00, and you do 3 Wednesdays in a row and nobody shows up, and you say, my anxiety group didn't go. That's fine, right?
Sure.
That's also
I actually commend. If that's your journey, and you fucking bravo for being the man in the arena, man.
Yeah,
and going for it. So commendable, right?
Yeah.
Just to get out
and
there.
That's a lot of, the line in the sand. I mean, that's a lot of support group language, right? Like group therapy is different than support groups. Group therapy is going to have the guardrails of 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks, like that kind of thing. But if you're trying to start a support group, if you are trying to find some people who have some kind of overlap, or you want to create the space, grief is also another population where there's a lot of grief groups out there. But those, for somebody to decide, for instance, that they are ready to share their grief is going to be an unbelievably particularly well-timed thing for them. And so as a result of how perfect that timing has to be, there just has to be a group. It's just got to be there, right? Like, because otherwise the
chicken and egg, brother. Somebody's got to start this.
Yeah, that's got to be there, and that space has to be there, and I think we have to be that space as best as we can for one another. You know, it doesn't mean that we're boundaryless. It doesn't mean that if somebody lets us down or if somebody's sharing of what they're upset about or keeping secret, like you might, when we talk about secrets, right? Plenty of times sharing a secret does have the ability to hurt somebody. Like that's also part of it. That's a whole other conversation. I don't want to think that we're neglecting that. Maybe that's also next week.
Sure.
But like when you are going to share something that maybe carries a lot of shame or it's in the long bag that you drag behind you, and you're trying to pick the space for it and the safe space for it, it's a very unique spiritual journey, whether we want to call it a spiritual journey or not. And the people those of us out here that want to hear it, that want to listen to it, that want to hold space for it, we have to be doing the work on ourselves to not neglect our own kind of hidden spaces. And you got to have a general acceptance of yourself if you want to be generally accepting by other people. If it's tough, it's tough. It's a balancing act. You're going to have it some days and not others.
And many of my messages have referred to myself as a imperfect, bankrupt MRFer.
God bless.
Amen.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to not hide it.
Well, and I think something, I would even think it's
failed businessman.
I would imagine people on the other side of some of this too would, people that listen to this and know you and listen to PA and maybe already have a relationship with you. I think there's probably also people that want to know more about what you kind of work on internally.
Sure.
Because, you kind of figurehead a lot of these things and create a lot of spaces here. But you take your sobriety seriously, you take your family seriously, you take this process seriously. And, a lot of what people want when they want to share, right? When they want to be vulnerable is they just want to know that somebody's going to take this seriously.
Yeah.
And that's a big part of why you and I are sitting here is that this is the kind of stuff that when I talk about it, I want to convey that I take it seriously, but I think it's stuff to be taken seriously. I think that the normal existence of what it's like to be a human is something to be taken seriously. The idea of we all start to believe that maybe there's something particularly bad about us, right? Like we should take that seriously, that we should take that as like, no, we want to create spaces where we can be whole, where we can be seen as whole, where we can be looked at in kind of a full human experience, not just one particular incident or one thing that we've kind of kept in this bag.
I love that.
I take that seriously. And I think that when we were thinking about, what we talk about in here or what we share, whether it be about, one another or own experiences, we're just trying to remind people that like who you are and what it's like to be you minute to minute is something to be taken seriously. It's something to, you're allowed to ask other people in your life to take it seriously, take this moment seriously, take this story seriously, take just sitting here with me seriously.
And what I hear you saying there and what's connected to me is that it's absolutely worth it.
Yes.
You are worth it.
Yeah. You as in any individual that would be listening, and then myself, and then you, Pondoff, and anybody in our orbit, right? It becomes that discussion of anything that you want to share when you have a moment of, well, I haven't shared this, or I don't know if I can share this, or you're carrying some kind of shame. Primarily, it's that you deserve to have that taken seriously. You deserve to be heard and listened to in a way where that it's serious, that it's real and it's appreciated, and that if it matters to you, it matters, right? That the world can reflect that back, and I respect anybody's opportunity to take that with a real particular approach and with a real forbearance and tolerance for change, and And my hope is that as we all learn how to take our stories more seriously and who we are more seriously, hopefully, as people sit here with us tonight, I'm just hoping that somebody needed to hear that.
Amen.